Thank you so much for joining today. And today we're going to talk about intuition in data-driven world. To be honest, I mean, it's always exciting when we have people talking about data, right? Because at least myself, my background is not that data-driven in some things, and I'm sure that I'm going to learn some stuff in this presentation made by the speaker, who is Jorge. But before we start, I'm going to introduce myself. This is Jorge, and I'm part of Product People and Product Manager One here. I have a background coming from business, but I have been working for product for a while, mostly in discovery, but also in delivery and the company and products that are B2C or B2B. Okay, if you ever want to talk to me, you have my Calendly there, or you can use LinkedIn. Before we start with the presentation, I would like you to introduce Product People in case you didn't know, or this is the first time you're joining to this call. What we do is basically we help companies to discover and deliver great products faster. And how we do this is basically in two ways. We manage the glamorous ways of working with product managers on an interim basis, and we work in missions between 3 to 1 year to help the company to achieve their goals. And we also try, and we want, we do actually, to drive and improve the community of product managers all around Europe. Actually, right now we have 14,000 people in LinkedIn, and between LinkedIn and all the channels that we have so far. So if you are ever interested, please go and check our website, and you can discover more about how can we help you and how can we help companies to do better product. Okay, slides. But first, a little exercise here. We're going to do a survey so people kind of start getting into the topic. And before Jorge, the speaker starts with the presentation, we have two questions here. The first one is, do any of you work in a company that claims not to be data-driven, or that doesn't want to become data-driven? You have yes or no, please reply. Or is getting scared of loud noise at night data-driven decision, or an intuitive one? And you have an option A, data-driven, or B, intuitive. So we're gonna let you reply. If you're in Zoom, you have the poll there, and if not, please use the chat. We check the chat from other channels too, in order to get a answer from you. So please vote. And while we wait, I'm gonna do that said. Thanks for waiting. We're gonna introduce Jorge, another Jorge, Jorge Rodriguez-Ramos, Head of Product Management and Talon.One. Please give a very welcome warm. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen from now on so he can start with the conversation, okay? Thanks, Jorge, to start with your presentation.
So, hi everyone, I will share my screen now and I will kick it off directly with the presentation. Please let me know if you can see a blank screen that says intuition in a data-driven world. Cool, 2 thumbs up. I'd like to kick it off apologizing profusely to anyone that really hates Star Wars. I promise you that you will still get something out of this presentation, and that it's just like a rhetorical device for me to take you through this journey. But I'll start with the journey, and with a journey that maybe some of you know. So you know that in the first Star Wars that came out, there is a part where Luke and Obi-Wan need to get to the planet Alderaan from Tatooine, and they get on this ship from a smuggler because they want to lay low, and they get out of hyperspace, and suddenly when they stop, the planet they're looking for is not there, and they're thinking like, okay, what's going on here? Where is the planet we're looking for? And then to top that out, like a small TIE fighter that you see here on the top shoots at them from behind, passes through, and they say like, oh, but that's like a short-range TIE fighter. There must be a base around here. And the ship starts going towards this star in the middle, and they say it's going to that moon. And someone says, that's not a moon. And at that point, Luke, says something really smart, which is, I have a very bad feeling about this. And it's kind of like not the most powerful intuition, but he's right enough. Like seconds later, they're being taken by the Death Star and being pulled in. The interesting thing is that this is such a clunky way of showing that he somehow felt something, that it became like an ongoing gag on Star Wars, and it's repeatedly used. But the universe stories that, they feel the force and then they can detect something is going wrong just through intuition. And I think that all of you that are product managers will probably have had similar feels at some point in your career. So for example, when you get a Slack message from the company founder saying that he wants to sit with you to check the backlog, or when the marketing department tells you, oh, we have a great feature idea, let's sit down and talk about it. Or when, for example, a dev tells you during grooming, like, oh, this refactor should only take me a couple of days. So if those things don't raise an alarm, they will in the near future. And probably you haven't been working in product manager for a long time. And while you might get those feels often, it's pretty difficult for you as a product manager to justify product decisions just based on a feeling, because most of the time, like, stakeholders are going to want to have some metrics, frameworks, and you get extra points if your frameworks somehow, reduce everything to a scoring, because stakeholders love this certainty. So, we are left with the only option of being more like 3CPO and always having to say the odds of something working out or not. Because intuition and being data-driven are views as opposite. So you're either like the intuitive guy that does everything gung-ho, or you're like 3CPO, boring, and everything is exact, and you need to explain what you do every single thing. And while we product managers might think that sometimes it's cool to be more intuitive, we know that that only leads to the dark side. It leads to not validating your assumptions, not tracking any metrics, building products just for you, or prioritizing the request only of the loudest stakeholder. So we revert back to being more like C3PO, and again, just spitting out the numbers and saying this is the way it needs to be. But intuition does have a very clear advantage over data-driven decisions, and that is that intuition is way faster. I'm not going to discuss here if it's more accurate or not, but intuition-based decisions are faster than if you analyze all the data and then make a decision. And faster decisions can really make a massive difference in product management. Just to go into this point a bit, if you're a product manager, if you work in a tech company and you don't think that there is a hidden countdown somewhere, you should think so, because there is a hidden countdown that is either that when it goes to 0, basically your competitor will come out with a killer feature, or your company will run out of money, or something will go wrong in the economy like it's going right now, and things will go upside down. So you always have a countdown, and making fast decisions is always going to be a positive for you. And even though there is a risk, because fast decisions intuitive decisions are faster, but they're very hard to gauge a priori how good they will be. And if you make decisions, you will end up in the dark side. There are people somehow that manage to make those fast decisions more accurately. But I'll tell you something, like, I don't really believe in the force, and I don't think that there is anything magical about making these intuitive decisions. The people that manage to make these intuitive decisions well are also in a way data-driven. It's just a different kind of being data-driven. So I'll give you an example that probably you've experienced while dealing with more senior product managers or with more juniors, and not just product managers, but with anyone. You see people that are very methodical and slow but safe, analyze everything, and make sure that they don't make any wrong decisions. They're still going to make wrong decisions, but they're going to be less often than those that are a bit more gung-ho. The thing is that in the time that someone that is slower takes 4 decisions, someone that is faster risky will take around 8. And maybe they'll do double the mistakes, but as long as their proportion of right versus wrong is more or less balanced, they're still going to get more stuff out of that. In this case, the checkboxes and the crosses are more an abstraction of whatever you want it to be. They could be features shipped, it could be decisions that you make in terms of like, what should we prioritize? The important thing here is that trying to be intuitive, if you're good with your intuition, will yield you better results. And intuition really isn't magic, as you can see here in the screen. Good intuition is also data-driven. The difference is the way the data is handled and processed by your brain. So going back to the example I gave you from Luke Skywalker, you don't need to be a genius to understand that there are a lot of signs in the air, like the planet that was supposed to be there isn't there, you're in a ship with someone you don't really know, you just got attacked by, you know, an Imperial ship, and they seem to be going to a huge, like, star base. So of course you're going to have a bad feeling about it. But in these other cases that I mentioned before, like when the company founder comes to you, or the marketing department with a feature idea, or a dev tells you that, these bad feelings are much more based in data, and it's very easy to kind of like connect the points together. Why do you feel dread when the company founder tells you, I want to check the backlog with you? That's because if you've dealt with enough company founders, you know that a lot of them are very opinionated. They will try to be very micromanaging, and maybe they will not have the best idea, so they will give you a hard time. So that is definitely data driven to a degree. With the marketing department, similar. Some marketing departments are great, some marketing people are great, nothing against marketing, but marketing tend to concentrate on a lot of these like local maximums, where they make a test, and the test tells them, if we make this button green and we put it smack in the middle, it'll increase conversion. And they might be right, but at the same time, that's going to mess up so many other things that sometimes it's hard to discuss with them. And with developers, the same. Like my rule of thumb, when a developer tells me a refactor is going to take X time, I multiply it by 2 or sometimes 3, depending on the product. So again, probably you will learn to do that intuitively yourself. But these are to a degree intuitive decisions, but you're still able to connect them to, you know, what made you make that decision. In reality, there are many decisions that you make daily that are intuitive, or what I would call pre-conscious. They're not based on information you have consciously, but they're based on pattern recognition. Because actually our brains are excellent pattern recognition machines. And this is actually an evolutionary thing, because in the wild, when you need to make decisions that might mean the difference between, you know, having lunch or not having it, or being eaten by a tiger or not being eaten, you need to make decisions fast, even at the risk of accuracy. So the question I was asking on the initial questions that didn't come up in the call about, is it data driven to be scared about a loud noise at night? That actually is an evolutionary thing. Like, it pays off better to, you know, sometimes a loud noise at night, or a loud noise in general, it's not going to mean a menace to you. But if you wait to analyze if that, you know, loud noise is a menace or not, in nature you would be eaten by the tiger. So it's better to get scared of it preemptively and run away, and then actually analyze if it was a good decision or not. So this is the kind of pattern recognition that our brains are very good at. And actually, pattern recognition is so useful and so fast in decision making and relatively accurate, that is also the way that we're building a lot of machines now to work. Like most of the self-driving technology that is being developed now, it's also based on pattern recognition, which is more the way neural networks work, our brain being a neural network. So it's interesting how we see this applied, this evolutionary advantage, we see it even applied to real life cases like self-driving cars. But to give you just an example of how powerful our brains can be detecting patterns that even we don't understand consciously. Have any of you heard of Uncanny Valley? And I know that you cannot answer, but if you haven't heard of it, I'm sorry, but I'm about to show you in an image what Uncanny Valley is. This is Uncanny Valley, which is, I don't know, guys, but for me, this is quite weird and disgusting. There is a reason for this, and I'll explain what Uncanny Valley is. Uncanny Valley was a concept that was developed by this Japanese roboticist, Masahiro Mori, who came up with this theory in the 70s that for, like, if you create a robot, or basically the more a robot looks like a human, the higher affinity we're going to have to that, to a degree. So basically, you see two axes here. One is affinity, that basically defines how much, you know, warmth feelings you're going to have towards something. And on the horizontal axis, you have human likeness, which is how much does it look like a human. And Mori had this theory that, you know, at the beginning, it works as you would expect it. So, you know, the less something looks like a robot, the less you're going to feel attached to it. So, you know, an industrial robot or a box, you will have very little affinity. But when the robots start looking like humans, you will start to feel more empathy towards them, and it will reach a peak. And once that peak is reached, suddenly it plummets. And suddenly, instead of keep on going up, you suddenly start getting these feelings of like, oh my God, what is that thing? and then it rises up again until you reach the point where you're looking at a complete healthy person. That's the reason, actually, and I can call this uncanny valley. And that's the reason that Wally seems very cute. He's very, very vaguely human when you think about it, but you get these warm feelings of him. And then Sophia, this robot out of hell, feels very scary. And this is your brain actually also using a pattern recognition that we would call intuition, because you don't consciously know why you're doing this. But there is actually a very important reason that also has to do with survival. We have this thing called behavioral immune system, in which your body is automatically going to know, or at least there are going to be certain cues that are going to make you feel rejections towards something that seems sick or to be in some way able to give you something bad. So what happens in Uncanny Valley is basically that it reaches a point where our visual cues, what we consciously can recognize as human, no longer are good enough for us to distinguish if something is human or not. And we get the impression not of something that is not human, like Wally, but looks a bit like a human, but of a sick human or of a dead body or of something like that. So that's the separation between the way our brain recognizes a pattern and somehow finds it negative, and the way we rationally would be able to be data-driven and say like, oh, well, Sophia has eyes and a nose and teeth. We should feel more empathy towards her than to Wally. But actually, we just feel that something is wrong. And that's this kind of pattern recognition that can be very useful. And I think that when we have product managers that are extremely good at making these correct guesses, and the only way to know if they're extremely good is to work with them very long. And it doesn't need to be only product managers. I've been actually, I'm giving founders a lot of flack, but some founders can be extremely intuitive and very good at it. The only way to really know it is if you work with them long enough and you start to see them making correct decisions consistently. That's the only, and that's also the same way, by the way, that you validate if a deep learning algorithm is correct. Like if it makes correct predictions consistently, it means that it's doing it right. You might not know why, and it would be nice to know why. And you might not know why your talented senior PM or your founder always get it right or very often. And it would be nice to know it, but at least you know that they get it right consistently. So something must be there making it work. And now you might be asking yourself, is it possible to learn this power? And the short answer is yes. The long answer is also yes, but with a couple of caveats. There are, allegedly, and I write here allegedly because I disagree with some of the points, and also depending on where you look at, some people speak of like less rational intuitions like divine intuition or spiritual intuition. But if you look at the kind of like the science, there are three types of intuition. There's holistic intuition, inferential, and affective. And the holistic intuition is the most similar one to the one I've been speaking about, where you have multiple sources of information that maybe are not conscious. And in your brain, somehow they match together and they give you a vague feeling or a vague recognition of a pattern. And you're not able to say exactly what are the points that made you feel that, but you feel a certain way about a decision or about something. Then there are the inferential ones, which are basically automations of data-driven decisions. So if you make a lot of data-driven decisions, a lot of the things will automatically hop on your brain, and you will not need to consciously think about them to reach a conclusion. Then you will be able to stop and say like, okay, why did I think that? And you can break it down. This would be actually the kind of intuition that we spoke about when the founder sends you a Slack message and says, let's have a chat. That's inferential. You've had enough experiences in order to know that that might end up badly. And the last one is the affective one, based on feelings. Basically, this is the one, it's inferential, but it's based more on emotions. So if every time I try to present here on Zoom, I do a terrible job, I will end up associating it with bad feelings, and I will have that intuition like this is going to be wrong. It might be like a self-fulfilling prophecy, but hopefully it won't be the case. And I also said allegedly because for me, in reality, the three of them are pretty much connected. Like if we speak of holistic intuition, necessarily it will also include affective and inferential, but it doesn't matter. I still want to give you the keys of being able to develop each of these three intuitions, because it will be extremely useful for you as a product manager. But it's very simple, actually. So to develop the holistic intuition, you need to be exposed to enough qualitative data. That means doing user interviews, that means doing surveys, that means doing this as much as you can. You will start recognizing patterns. To develop your inferential intuition, you need to be exposed to the quantitative data. So look at the data, create dashboards, look at it daily so that you can also automate seeing what or feeling what is right and what is wrong. And to develop your affective intuition, the only thing I can tell you is make mistakes. The more disappointed you are by doing things or by being wrong, the less it will go. So in short, speak with your users, dig through the data, and make mistakes. This is the best advice I can give you. And you might say, like, is this it? I could know this before the presentation. It kind of is it, but what you need to do is you need to keep on doing it all the time. You need to speak with a lot of users often, you need to dig through data often, you need to make mistakes often in order to make your intuition better. And like I said before, the only way really to validate if your intuition is good or not is by seeing if you predicted correctly based only on intuition. So there's two caveats that I'm going to put out there for you. If you start using intuition, be careful about two things. One is avoiding confirmation bias. And that's the reason it's very important that you keep track of the things that you try to guess intuitively. Humans tend to remember more vividly the things that confirm what they already believed. So if you think of something and then it does happen that way, you will remember that, but you will not remember as vividly the other 10 times or the other 10 predictions that you made that didn't happen. So write down your intuitions. And actually, even better, write down your intuitions and also find ways of validating them with data, even if it's later. If you need to take a fast decision, take it fast, but do it later. And another point in that case, don't be like, Han Solo, don't take everything gung-ho. Avoid being risky when you shouldn't. There's always different product decisions that need to be taken. If there is a very high risk, maybe you want to be more like 3CPO. And if the decision can be easily corrected, if you can, roll out a hot fix the next day, then feel free to be a bit more like Han Solo. And, I want to go back to 3CPO because I've also given him a lot of flack. There's nothing wrong with being data-driven. We should all be data-driven. It's just that I usually see companies sinning more from the side of being excessively data-driven and feeling that everything needs to be quantified and that every decision needs to have like a data justification. But the fact that some people take it to the limit doesn't mean that there's not anything wrong with CPO, because in the end, you don't need to choose between those two options. You can mix and match. You can make it work because, it is very cool to be an intuitive Jedi that does everything with a lightsaber, but it's even cooler to be a 3CPO with a lightsaber. So being data-driven, but at the same time, having the intuition to fall back on. Thank you.
Wow. I can say that I enjoyed a lot what you said. Thank you so much for the presentation. If you don't mind, I'm going to share the screen from now so we can follow with the event. Okay, so now is your time to think about the questions what you would like to ask during the Q&A. But before we go, thanks, Jorge. It was very great. Good. And the storytelling was something that you mentioned at the beginning to this call. Like, I would like to have this storytelling so people can get this attraction. At least with me, you got it. So it was great. A good reminder too. Thank you so much for that, by the way. So please, attendees, this is your time to write down the questions in Zoom, YouTube, or LinkedIn. We take care of all of them. So let's, while you write, I'm gonna explain a little bit more about us as a company. As I said at the beginning, probably people, we help companies to deliver and discover products faster. And there are different cases where we can help companies to do this, right? And to start working as an interim GMs in a better way. Sorry. One thing could be, you need to cover a product management position in some cases, like, product manager or head of product, and it is going, or your head of product is going on parental leave, and you need someone to cover this right away. And we can be a good fit in that matter because we have talented people that is very used to onboard very fast, and you can continue as smooth as you were doing before. And then another service that we provide here is a product coach and consultant. We also do product coaching and consultancy in case that you feel that your team needs to upskill in some way. And last but not least, we work a lot on the product discovery lead, right? And we can also help you on discovery sessions of your next impactful product feature and how you like to launch, with different techniques, for example, no code MVP or more code MVP, in order for you to understand if the thing that you had in your mind was the next big feature for you for your company. Then here you have some examples about some companies that we work with, some B2C clients, Alando, here, Scout, or Jugas myself, I'm there right now, for example. Then we have some other B2B clients, which, for example, are Plian, Utopiometry. As you can see, we have people that can work and cover both sides, B2C or B2B, or even combine it too. And then as the proof, you have some positive feedback that you can also find in the website. If you browse a little bit and you check every product case in detail, you can see, the referrals or the comments that the people that work with us share, so we can explain, okay, we are doing a good job. It's not just us invented this, right? And before we wrap up, we have some stats here. I mean, we can say that we are very proud that we have 71% of retention. We are a team of 40 product leaders and product managers and more people that starts at 8 p.m. and also are upskilling. And last but not least, and for me, it is very important, we have 50% women in the team and 60% in the leadership roles, because we aim to be, as equal as possible in this matter. You have a picture of the whole team. And if you want to be part of the team, you have the hiring section in the website and also on LinkedIn, okay? But as you can see, and this is very important for us, we have a very important spot for you here in the team. As you can see, we are a group of people from different origins and different cultures, and this is something that we value a lot when it comes to product. So please don't be shy and just check our website on the link, so you can be the new product manager here at ProPeople. So I think that there's a lot. You had enough time. Now it's time for Q&A. So I'm gonna check some questions from the chat. Okay, so I'm gonna start with Stacy, who asked for, how do we leverage or manage intuition as a group, whether a group of stakeholders, product teams, etc. Jorge?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Stacy. So it's an interesting one because there are different aspects of how to manage it or leverage it. So for starters, I would say that you need to show that your intuition, if you want to leverage your intuition with stakeholders particularly, you need to prove to them that your intuition is something worth trusting. And for that, you need to do one of two things. You either need to create that rapport with them by having used your intuition well many times, or maybe having used data-driven decisions, or at least pretended to be data-driven decisions, and showing them like, hey, look, I know what I'm doing, and then they will trust it more. In terms of as a group, actually, other than being very open with the intuitions that people have. So if someone tells me in the team, I don't know what, but I don't feel well about this project or whatever. And people tend to be pretty open about that. They just don't dare to say, I don't feel right about this project, we shouldn't do it. They just say, oh, I don't feel right about it. I try to follow up and say, like, I try to make those unconscious kind of like pattern recognition, data-driven approaches conscious, and I try to say, like, okay, why does it make you feel iffy? Like, what's wrong here? Maybe they are onto something, or maybe not. And I think that's always a good exercise to try to, in some intuitive cases, you will be able to surface out why that intuition happened. In other cases, you won't, but maybe if you get it right all the time, there is something that you're just not looking at. Does that answer the question to a degree?
I think she said yes, probably, but I couldn't see her face. So let's go with the next question. This one, I think that comes from LinkedIn or from YouTube. I don't say, but it's from Linus. This person said, I'm curious about how to best communicate intuition-based decisions to stakeholders, especially when they might have other opinions. It can feel difficult to make an argument without data.
Yes, and I mean, I'm not advocating for making an argument without data, but if you have a strong intuition, it should not take you very long to gather at least some data that will, prop up your intuition. So, for decision making, maybe intuition is enough for you. I would say always mix it up with a bit of data. Even researching what competitors do, or even researching something related to the topic, will yield you at least some confirmation. I said before, be careful with confirmation bias. That also applies to, when you believe in something and you do a Google search, you're going to see the thing that confirms it, and you're going to ignore the ones that don't. I would say use that cautiously, but always bring a bit of data if you're speaking with a stakeholder. Or if there's no way to get data, something else that also works pretty well is a rationale. Like there must be a way to explain it, a logic behind it, even if you don't have all the dots. And I do understand if I was a stakeholder, I would also have a lot of trouble if someone comes to me and says, I just feel that this is the right decision. I would try to unravel that a bit. So yeah, prop it up a bit. That would be my tip. Yeah. I don't know. Again, since the question isn't here, I don't know if that answered it. But
yeah, true. I mean, Sarah, maybe you can get in touch with this person since this comes from another chat, and we can get the confirmation. In the meantime, we can continue. We have another question. Jan asked, how do you proceed when data confirms to go with a feature, for example, but your intuition tells you otherwise?
If the data is conclusive and it shows that the feature is working the way it was intended to work, then your intuition was wrong. Like, learn from it and adapt your pattern recognition to that. There will be cases where some of the data you get maybe is not the full picture. So then try to investigate what other data you could get in order to make your intuition somehow go away. But your intuition should slowly adapt to what data confirms, or to what reality confirms. Again, I don't know if that answers it, but happy to elaborate more if you want.
Jan, do you say yes? Does? Great. Does. Thank you. I have a question. Returning to that point where you explain how to train yourself, like, hey, if you're going to get better in this holistic intuition, interferential intuition, and then the feeling. For the first case, you said you need to get exposed to qualitative data. I mean, in the best case scenario, you're a product manager and you are exposed to that process of getting qualitative data. But what happens when your company is not that in fan of, discovery, conversations? What would you do in your case? How would you get exposed so you can get better in that thing, even if your company is not providing you this solution?
I mean, I work for a B2B company with a limited number of clients, a lot of big enterprise companies. So I know that pain, because we don't get to, first of all, we have a much smaller pool of clients to speak with. And then always the relation is more between customers success and them than between product managers and them. What we do a lot is we listen to recordings. We try to stay in touch, understanding how clients use the product. So you don't, on an ideal case, you will have direct contact, user interviews, usability tests, whatnot. But short of that, look for the best that you have available, I would say. If the best that you have available is recordings, then go for that. Try to get these interviews, try to speak with, this is something that goes a bit against what a lot of product people will tell you, but in our case, we have some customer success managers in our company that are extremely intuitive, and because they're exposed all the time to clients, I highly trust their outlook on stuff. We even have internally poached people from customer success into product, because they are the people that get the most exposure, so they develop this intuition that is really useful. And that's how powerful it is. Okay. True, Ari. That's the thing, right? And you use what you have, and what you have is probably sometimes very valuable, right? As you mentioned, the customer support people and customer success people, they are exposed every time, every day, and they get feedback. So yeah, totally true. Cool, thank you for that. We have a question from Elizabeth. How might we practice developing our intuition decision-taking skills without generating a major risk for your product team or company in the cases where your decision doesn't generate a desired outcome? Wow, that was a long one, but I thought that if you want to review it, it's in the chat. Yeah, it's also a very good question. It basically it boils down to when do you, and again, it's never extreme. It's never like 100% intuition, 100% data driven. It's always like somewhere in between. So I would say generally the more one-way door or one-way solution or feature that I'm working in, the more data driven I'm going to be. Like if the cost of being wrong is way higher and you cannot roll back or change the feature, then I will want to quantify or validate with data much more than the other case. So for me, the best way to develop intuition or to do it in a safe space is picking, first of all, picking it, use it before you even ship something. So use it in usability testing or in whatever, like create a very rough prototype based on your intuition, try to put it out there. You'll only waste your time and maybe a bit of a user's time. That's about it. But in general, that's kind of like the approach. Low risk decisions, be more intuitive. High risk decisions, be less intuitive.
Yeah, this sounds like a matrix, right? More or less, like, where is your point? And if you need this, you can place that. Maybe this could be for the next time. And we have another question from Olga. Thank you, Olga. Could you give an example of a time when you had to decide between taking risks and playing it safe, but decide to take on risks instead? And then we'll have more questions, but you can start with that one.
Yeah, so I mean, I've had situations where I had similar things to what were mentioned before, where the data seemed inconclusive. I've never had a situation where the data told me like this is absolutely wrong, and I still continued. But I've had situations where it was a new. When I was working out at Featury, we were working on a completely new feature that involved a lot of different departments and that was slated for 3 to 5 months of work. And after releasing the first version, we didn't really see on the data like the increase that we thought we would have in terms of like kept basket and box, the value of the boxes going up and things like that. But the thing is, at that point we didn't have all the data, and a lot of the data depended on what happened 3 months later after the second order of clients would happen. So in that case, basically I took safe risk by saying like the data is inconclusive so far. I still believe this is going to work out. And luckily I had buy-in from stakeholders. So I would say that is quite important. Like, I think if you have reasonable stakeholders and you explain to them like, hey, look, we don't have all the data, but I really feel that this will work, and you are able to create this rationale, even if the origin is your intuition, you will be able to convince them. I would never take a risk, or I mean, maybe I would, but I would know that it's a very big risk. Like if you're really convinced of something and you want to take a risk, just know what you're risking. Like if you don't have any stakeholder back, if you are really endangering the company and it doesn't play off, you're in big trouble. That in reality, that's up to you. So, and then advice on handling the situations. Yeah, what I mentioned. So try to get stakeholders that believe in whatever you are trying to build or whatever you're trying to do, because it's usually very important. If you have someone, and in the end, the best intuition is the intuition of the founder. If the founder has absolutely zero data to back his intuition, but he says, I think this is going to work, you're going to do it because it's his company or her company. So, the higher backing that you get from someone, whether it's based on data or on like it's their pet project, the easier it will be to sell the risk to everyone else.
Olga, you please reply in case you got everything clear. I mean, let's use the opportunity. Thanks, she said. Okay, so that's awesome, cool. We're almost more or less, we have enough time for some more questions. I do have another one actually. Sorry to still the founder here. About the third type of intuition, the feelings. I mean, it is true that okay, I tried this. If it's negative, I learned that this wasn't the result that I wanted, so I don't repeat it with time. But don't you think that this could be very biased or very I mean, there are lots of different elements that play in your scenario when you are presenting something or when you're adjusting something that could, I don't know, make your decision to be a success or not. So I don't know if the feeling could be considered something as, as part of intuition here. I mean, I think that in a way can block you. Do you feel the same?
Yeah. Intuition doesn't need to be in itself like a positive force. And I completely agree with you. It's true that intuition, negative feelings can be more of a blocker than anything else. I would say to a degree, they can also be like, again, thinking of where we get intuition, like evolutionarily, it's pretty useful. Probably being scared of heights maybe has like an evolutionary component to it, or certain things. That doesn't mean that it's the best choice to make when it comes to career moves. Like never trying things that scare you is probably not an advice that I would give someone if they want to progress in their career. Probably the opposite. So out of all the intuitions, for me, that one is the one that I would take most with a pinch of salt. Also because I think it's covered by holistic intuition, and also because, again, you always need to validate if what you're saying is true. If what your intuition is telling you is true, and you need to do it later. And in the case of fear, it might be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because fearing that something will happen will make you more likely to then get nervous and not working.
Mm-hmm.
So pick your battles in that sense. But yeah, don't let that intuition particularly to guide all of your decisions.
Okay. I mean, it sounds tough to do, but at the same time, it's the more logical thing to do, right? And
maybe one piece of advice that goes against intuition, but something that I try to do with myself, and this just doesn't go just with fear, but with any kind of strong emotion, like emotional response that I have to anything. I always try to stop myself and think like, okay, why am I feeling that? Like, why did I get angry at this person? Or why did I, feel down? Or why did this and that? To try to paint the picture of what are the unconscious things. So this is kind of like deconstructing your intuition. Like, why did I feel that way? And that will help you decide if you want to use your intuition or not in that case.
True. That's true. I mean, one of the things that I can say is that at least when it comes to intuition, it's true that it's faster, but at the same time, you need to learn when to stop in order to invest enough time to think if the intuition is the right thing that you want to use, or how are we going to use intuition in the best way possible, right? So yeah. I'm enjoying a lot this conversation. What can I say? So let me double check the chat. There is no more questions I can say. Elif, still in the party at the end. Okay, so Elif, how can we assess an idea based on a stakeholder intuition? When the intuition doesn't come from us, that's a good one. How can we evaluate that idea when we are on the other side?
Well, as we say, I mean, this happens all the time. I've given the example of the founder with an intuition. You can't try to disprove it with data, and that's the case where data is longer, but data is the more like proof way of confirming or disconfirming something. So if a stakeholder comes to you and says like, I feel that this is just this way, you can try to find data that will confirm a different approach. You can also try to understand where his intuition is coming from. Like, you also need to sometimes trust other people's intuitions, or at least give them a chance and say like, okay, if he or she feels that way, they might have a good reason. So try to deconstruct it also on his side. That's another way of actually leveraging intuition as a group. At the same time, I'm seeing in my mind the type of stakeholder probably you're thinking of, which is someone, the hippo of the room saying we need to do it this way, and it's very hard to deal against that. But sometimes take it as to try to give their intuition a chance, and if you really believe that they are in the wrong, disprove it with data or with reasoning. This would be my tips.
Thanks. Elif, did that answer to you? You say yes. I don't know if you're nodding. Yes, thank you. Perfect. Well, it's about time, 7:15 or 16 actually. Thank you so much for joining today's event. Please, if you want to know for sure more about Jorge, I'm sure that he will be happy that to connect on LinkedIn too. For us, it's more or less the same thing. If you want to know get news about us, you can always join the chat that we have in Telegram. And also, if you want to be in touch with all the events that we program every week, please join the meetup community that we have there. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jorge. It was very insightful. I'm going
Thank you. My pleasure.